It's finally done, dudes. Hello there, it's Akzel here. Welcome, finally, to the, okay, I kept typing it up as a build video because I did originally intend to, actually film the build process, but then I realized I don't really have a good setup for that because my plan was like, okay, so, gonna use my camera plugged into my computer and we're gonna record the... That's not gonna work. So, yeah, I couldn't really do that. I did take pictures along the way and kind of logged the process on Twitter with a few, so you can kind of go take a look at that. But for now, we are going to take a look at the build. Unfortunately, it looks more reflective on camera than it actually is. Like, I can still see stuff in the reflection of it, but it's not as bad in person as it looks right there. But yeah, so you just had to enjoy my head over the CPU cooler. Also, at the bottom there with the underglow, it's flashing on camera, but in person it's just a steady light. So yeah, keep those things in mind. It is not actually constantly flashing like that at me. Fortunately, that'd be quite annoying. Yeah, I should probably put in a seizure warning or something. That'd be a good idea. That would be a good idea. I know, is that enough? Because whatever. Anyway, so instead of the process of building the computer, I'm gonna go through each part that I have in here and how things were as I was building it. In this case, this is the NZXT Noctis 450, and we're going to get to that later. So to start with, and to make this easier so I kind of have a list to go based off, let me open my PC part picker list here. Right. So first and foremost, let's start with the CPU. It is the Ryzen 7 1700, and it's very nice. 8 cores, 16 threads for the same price that you could get an i7 from Intel. And the stock cooler, which you don't get with the 1700X or 1800X, even though those are also the better ones. But either way, you get the stock cooler with the 1700, and it has RGB capabilities, but without having it plugged in to control the RGBs, it defaults to red. Same with the motherboard, and the motherboard is the MSI X370 Gaming Pro Carbon. Also very nice, no issues that I would say specific to the motherboard. The BIOS is okay. My previous motherboard, or the motherboard in my previous build is also an MSI, so yeah, that's kind of stepped up. Was also an MSI motherboard before, so I'm used to the BIOS and how that works. Let me actually zoom this in on the inside a little. Can I get that strobe light to stop as badly? There we go. Okay. I don't know. Maybe I should I zoom it back out for the full view? It's fine. Kind of see inside a little better now. That works. Got 16 gigabytes of G.Skill Ripjaws 5 memory. Now, the RAM, it's nice. So funny thing, when I first got it, it was like, wait a minute, this doesn't list Ryzen compatibility anywhere. It's not on AMD's website, so I was kind of freaking out a little bit. Fortunately, I then saw a review that was like, yep, using it on Ryzen, it's fine. So that was good. The memory's speed is 2400 megahertz. Now, Ryzen tends to like faster memory, but the reason I ended up getting this memory instead, not only because for one thing, it looks nicer to me than the built for Ryzen memory by G.Skill, like the Flare X stuff or whatever. That just looks kind of too much. But this looks nice and sleek and looks very good. Now, it was also like on a bit of a sale at the time, so I was trying to get like the lowest price at the time that I could, because that just seemed like a better idea. So it's only the XMP profile only goes at 2400. At some point when I get around to future upgrades, I'll go into more detail later, but when we get to that, I might try seeing if I can push it further, because Ryzen does like faster memory, probably would also help gaming performance. We'll get into performance benchmarks and comparisons to the i7 rig a little bit later, but continuing onward, I have a Samsung 850 EVO at 500 gigabyte SSD. Can't really see it through the window on camera, but it is like right there. So yeah, very nice, reasonably quick. Eventually, I'm going to be switching that. Well, I'm not really switching. I'm moving my OS and stuff to an NVMe drive, which I can just have that on the motherboard. So that's going to be pretty awesome. And then the Evo there is going to be used for all my video stuff for now, so that I can depreciate my 3.5-inch hard drive, which you can't see on camera. You can kind of see around the back of the case, though. There's a thing over there in the bottom right corner. That's an external enclosure for my hard drive, because that thing vibrates like a motherfucker. So it just causes a lot of noise, and I hate it, but I need it. So I took it out of the case because it was vibrating and crap, and I was like, oh my god. So luckily I have that external enclosure for other reasons, but so I have it in there hooked up to USB 3 right now. So yeah, at least it's still out of the way and no noise from it now, so that's good. But god, that annoys me. Anyway, and the nice thing about this motherboard, it has 2 NVMe slots. So I'm going to get the 960 EVO. It's going to be a 500 gigabyte 960 EVO. And then eventually, probably quite a bit later, going to get a 1 terabyte Western Digital Blue NVMe drive. And then I can just have NVMe storage, and that'll be pretty cool because I don't have to worry about SATA cables or SATA power or anything. And that's just awesome. The graphics card and the elephant in the case is it was originally, and technically it still is, but it was a EVGA GTX 980 Ti hybrid. So originally, it had a closed-loop liquid cooler cooling the GPU and stuff. The pump died on that about 4 months after I got it, so for the longest time I was back to using my GTX 770, which is currently sitting in the old build over there. But yeah, so the pump died on that. Eventually, like a couple months ago, I got that cooler that you can see on it right now, and it cools the GPU good. It just provides no support to the PCB on the card, so it sags a lot, as you can probably see on the camera there. It sags a lot, so that kind of sucks, but at least I have my 980 Ti available to me to use again, rather than having to use the 770, so yeah, that I would say that's the worst part of the build right now, because it just clashes so bad with everything, but it's functional, so I gotta go with function over form for now, but man, least favorite part of the build. Anyway, everything is powered by a Corsair 860i, or wait, A860i, whatever it's called, fully modular power supply, very nice. Almost no issues with it. Only thing I don't necessarily like is that instead of the fan just constantly spinning at a low speed, it only starts to spin up when it's be under heavier load, which it's audible when it does that, so that's kind of annoying, but whatever, not enough for me to want to switch out the power supply anytime soon. So that's about it for the internal. So let's talk about the case now. The case, as I said, is the NZXT Noctis 450, and it looks even better in person than it did on pictures on the internet. And like, I love this case. It looks so great. Cable management was really easy too, so that's good. Biggest complaint is that every thumb screw was over tightened, so I had to use a screwdriver on those initially. I think it comes with 5 drive gauges. I don't quote me on that. I'm not actually sure. I took them all out though. I initially left the one in because I had my hard drive on that, but then vibration issues, so I took that out from this side, by the way, because I didn't want to open that back panel anymore. Because issue number 2, which could also arguably be because of poor cable management in the back, which I didn't think I did that bad, but anyway, Yeah, so side panel was a bitch to get back on. Like, not so much the this side panel, but the other one, the back side panel, that was kind of a bitch to get back on, but I eventually did just fine. The top panel went on fine. The front panel was also kind of annoying to get back on, but whatever, it's back on. So that was a nice thing about my old case, the Phantom 410. The panels all went on beautifully, and it was quite nice. This one was a bit more finicky with it, but it worked out. The case looks great. I don't have any wasted space from an optical drive bay because I don't use like discs anymore for anything. And if I ever do need to, I'll just get an external disk drive or something. But I don't see myself needing to do that anytime soon. So, like I said, cable management was great. So, as I was doing the build, there's one other thing that does look quite terrible, but again, you can't really see on camera here, but I'm going to try to bring this... Sorry, microphone. I'm going to try to bring this in closer to get a better view of it. If we can even see that here. Okay, it's very hard to see. You can can I zoom this in anymore? I can. Zoom this in a bit more. Can't really see that there. You know, I could just take the side panel off. Hold on, that'll make it a lot easier. Hold on. Putting it. I should have just laid it down. Okay, is that in? Good. Okay. We're gonna open it up for a look inside, as we have that very blurry view of things. Don't worry, it's for cinematic effect. That's my excuse. Right. Oh yeah, captive thumb screws. Those are nice too. Although on the back side panel, I accidentally completely unscrewed them, which also made me realize, oh, that's how captive thumb screws work. So that was kind of neat. Anyway. Also, no side fan to get stuck. Also, freaking hair on the inside of the case, like immediately after I put it back on. Okay, that's fixed. All right, I'm gonna hold this. Make sure I don't do anything. So, first off, looks so much worse with that card in there. Okay, let me. I can't keep holding this. Okay, hold on. Going on the bed. We're probably gonna get more hair on it now. Okay, so camera back off. So, okay, as we look in here, I should probably get some light in there. That would help this a lot more, wouldn't it? Hold on. Flashlight. Okay, I wanted to show that cable right there going across the SSD and stuff. That is my USB 3 cable. Now, somewhere up around the back up there is a right angle USB 3 connector. So you might be wondering, well, okay, why didn't you just use that? I was trying to, and instead of actually going into the port, the USB 3 cable decided to bend the pins in that port. So if I was trying to fix it, but it'd be very difficult to do without taking the motherboard out so I can actually reach things. So for now, have that cable going across the SSD. At least it's hard to see because it's not that bright in the case, but that was so infuriating. I was just trying to plug in the USB 3, but no, it just bent the pins in the port instead. Fortunately, that had 2 ports for front panel USB 3s, so we're fine, but God. All right, rant over. Yeah. Okay, so we're just going to leave that off for now, so you can kind of get a better look at the internals. There we go. So anyway, that's how the build went. So for the most part, except for the USB 3 thing, and trying to get the side panels back on and the over-tightened thumb screws, overall, it went well aside from those things. Cable management, as I think I already said earlier, was easy. Very easy. I'd like to think I did a much better job with this than my old build, but you know, we can factor that to experience and the fact that the power supply shroud can hide the mess of cables that's back there. I'm not going to show you the back panel for that reason, aside from it being difficult to put back on. So yeah, yay for power supply shroud. They are the best things in sliced bread. Anyway, now that we're done talking about the build and the build process, I think it's about time that we get into benchmarks. I'll be right back. Okay, so before we get into the benchmarks, there are some things that you need to keep in mind. One, the Ryzen 7, it is not overclocked at all. The base clock on a Ryzen 7 1700 is 3 gigahertz, and then I think it boosts up when it's using fewer cores or something. I'm not 100% sure how that works. But with my i7 4770K, the old one, that was overclocked to 4 gigahertz. So this is not a clock for clock comparison or anything. So keep that in mind, because that will be especially important as we get into the game benchmarks. But that being said, without further ado, let's get started looking at these. So first thing we're going to show here is render speeds in Kdenlive, which initially when I was doing the benchmarks, I was like, okay, this shouldn't be too hard, just run some stuff real quick in Kdenlive, render that one video, that war video, and we'll go from there. Hold on, let me, one sec, I need to do a thing. Turn on cursor, there we go. Usually turn that off because it gets in the way, but I kind of need it for demonstration purposes. Anyway, so this has a period in the title on YouTube. I don't know why I put a dash here. I have a dash on like my actual named stuff, but like on YouTube it has a period. Just reasons. Anyway, so basically it was taking a barely edited video versus a heavily edited video. And as you can see with Kdenlive, the Ryzen 7 did do a little bit better in these results here, which this is just a clip from the most recent Tomb Raider episode, just a roughly 1 minute clip of well, it's the sequence where, okay, you know, I'm probably gonna show it on screen while I'm doing this because I have the clip rendered out. Future self, make sure to do that and don't be lazy. Actually do that. Anyway, so there's that. This is a 1 minute clip of that. So Kdenlive Ryzen 7, it's rendered that out in 2 minutes 5 seconds versus the i7's 2 minutes 22 seconds. So it was faster, but not a huge amount faster considering the Ryzen 7 has double the cores and threads. So that was a little weird, which made it seem like Kdenlive, like, obviously it does get some advantages from multi-threading, but not insanely so. Then when I went to the 4K benchmarks, for one thing, good God, that took so much longer than the lower resolution benchmarks, which I kind of have a theory might have something to do with RAM somehow based on the Blender test, but we'll get into that in a moment. And then the long video was more heavily edited, so there was stuff going there, and then the Ryzen 7 actually lost. And I was like, okay, I'm going to not bother doing the 1440p because that's probably going to have a similarly disappointing result. So that got me thinking, Kdenlive clearly not best optimized for multiple cores and threads. So it was at that point that led to one of the recent videos I did, Linux video editors, Kdenlive versus Blender. I was comparing that to Blender because I knew Blender could do multi-process rendering with the script. So I went and did that, and as you can see, when we switched to Blender, I redid the tests on the i7, did those in Blender. Actually did a tiny bit worse than Kdenlive, but very similar to Kdenlive, which is interesting, whereas the Ryzen 7 did significantly better with Blender. Granted, I was not able to test with the heavily edited video because it was edited in Kdenlive. There's no easy way to translate that over to Blender. So we only got the easy test here with the Tomb Raider gunfight scene, but much better results than in Kdenlive. So I don't know, like I guess Kdenlive maybe not the best optimized for this stuff, but whatever. Blender works better. That's what I'm switching to for the foreseeable future. More info on that in the other video I mentioned. Anyway, now we're going to go to the game tests. And once again, keep in mind, i7 overclocked to 4 gigahertz, Ryzen 7 base clock of 3 gigahertz. A lot of games prefer higher clock speeds over more cores and threads. Keep that in mind. So, as we go over to them, you will immediately see the Ryzen 7 is very much losing, which, you know what? I kind of expected that because we kind of knew that Ryzen is, like, if you're going for a pure gaming machine, Intel is still kind of the way to go. But if you're going for a very, very nicely priced workstation-ish processor, then absolutely go with Ryzen. It's also great with streaming. So there you go. Anyway, let's start with Dirt Showdown. Most of these results are at 1440p because that is what my main screen is at. That is what I play games at. Dirt Showdown has a limit of 1080p. So I had to test it at 1080p. Did 8 times MSAA with otherwise maximum settings. So the i7 minimum FPS was 56.96, average 65.58. Now, this is the absolute bare minimum that it ever reached, not like 1% or 0.1% lows like you see with a lot of other reviewers, because I don't really have a good way to do that. But minimum on the Ryzen got down to 23, but the average was only 6 frames per second lower than the Core i7, which this was kind of weird because there is an option in the graphics settings for Dirt Showdown that says refresh rate. And I was like, okay, highest it can go is 60. There you go. So based on the Ryzen results, I thought like, okay, so that must be a cap or something, right? Apparently not. So I don't know what's up with that because I thought it seemed like a cap or something, but I guess not. Either way, in terms of actually watching the benchmark play out, they looked very similar. So whatever. That's a difference versus actual numbers and perceived smoothness. They both seemed fine despite what the minimum frame rate would suggest here. Anyway, then we move on to Total War Attila, which, again, mostly max settings, had it set to MLAA because that was the lowest anti-aliasing option that could be on, and I usually don't turn anti-aliasing too high because with that 1440p panel, usually things look just fine anyway. Except for Dirt Showdown, I turned that up because it didn't, but it's also 1080p, so whatever. Anyway, once again, no surprise, the Core i7 did do better at 30.5 average frames per second versus the Ryzen's 21. Whatever, they're still kind of lowish for each, and yeah. Again, Ryzen is not overclocked in this test. The Intel is. Eventually, I'm going to redo these tests with the Ryzen 7 overclocked. We'll see how things compare at that point, but that's going to be sometime down the line, not anytime soon. Moving on to Total War Warhammer. Max settings, which I'm going to explain this in a second. So there was a setting, there were like a couple things I could turn on that I forgot to in the initial tests, which the first number here was the initial test, 78.3. Then I turned on the said settings and did the test. Now, with the Ryzen, the difference between turning on those settings and before I turned them on was not that much difference in frames per second. So the average for the Ryzen, 47.1. It's like, okay, cool. That didn't lower it too much. When I redid the test with the i7 with those settings turned on, it went from 78.3 average down to 49.8. So I don't know what happened there, because if there wasn't that big of a difference for the Ryzen, but there was a huge difference for the i7, so I don't know. That was kind of a weird result, but whatever. The redid tests matched them up a lot better. I just don't understand why it lost so much performance on the i7 from 78.3. So somehow the i7 lost its massive lead. Whatever. Anyway, going from there, went to Shadow of Mordor, just set to Ultra. Didn't do any custom tweaking or anything, just straight up set to Ultra. Once again, all these are at 1440. We do want to emphasize that. So, except for Dirt Showdown, but otherwise all at 1440. Minimum FPS, of course, Core i7 wins. Maximum, the Ryzen pulled ahead, but most importantly, the average close to 70. That's 55. Whatever. And also, to reiterate, 2400 megahertz RAM. Ryzen does also like faster memory. So when I eventually get to overclocking, I do see these results getting better. I don't know how well they'll match up to the i7, but they should get better. Anyway. Then finished off with Tomb Raider. Minimums were 3 FPS off, maximums 2 FPS off. Same with the average. So that was a lot closer. So I guess the other ones are a lot more CPU bound for some reason, but Tomb Raider's just like, nah, you're good. Just graphics card, please. I don't know. Anyway, as for why I chose the games that I did here, these are the only Linux games that I had with built-in benchmarks that I could actually get to work, because BioShock Infinite is supposed to have one too, but I couldn't get it to work. Anyway, yeah. So these are the games that actually have built-in benchmarks, because I am lazy and don't really have / know of a better way to benchmark games on Linux. I should probably look into that. But whatever. Anyway, ending off the benchmarks, I did the Unigine benchmarks. And the results here were a lot more interesting. So with Unigine Heaven, Ryzen still lost in minimum, but exceeded the i7 in both maximum and average frame rates. So either that means that the Unigine benchmarks are a lot better optimized, like just to focus on the graphics card, or they're also better for multiple cores and threads. Excuse me. At least slightly. I don't know. I'm going to assume. I mean, it's one of those. I don't know which. But yeah, the Ryzen actually pulled ahead in the Unigine tests, so that was pretty cool. So same with Unigine Valley, won in everything, including minimum this time. And then the new one, Unigine Superposition, overall frame rates were crap on both. But the Ryzen did still pull ahead. So that's pretty cool. Ryzen actually pulled ahead in Unigine, although Unigine is arguably synthetic benchmarks, so take that how you will. Actual games, see the results here. For pure gaming, Intel's probably still the way to go, but for multitasking, like streaming and stuff, while playing games, go with Ryzen. You get all those cores and threads to work with, it's pretty good. So, that about covers it for this build video. That is my Ryzen 7 1700 build. Very happy with it. The old system, no, I'm not doing a giveaway or anything if anybody was going to ask or assume that that the old system, the CPU and motherboard and stuff, are going to a Slaneth in need. If you don't know who Slaneth is, you will. You will. Maybe. Or you won't. I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, for the future, the build is complete enough to be called complete, but I'm not fully done with things for it. As I mentioned earlier when we were going over the parts in it, I am eventually going to get an NVMe SSD, Samsung 960 EVO. I'm gonna get that, and then I'm gonna just not use my hard drive at all, because that's one of my eventual goals, is just not have hard drive storage at all and just go purely SSD. Yes, it's a lot pricier than hard drives, but it's also a lot faster, so that's pretty good. It's pretty nice. Also, eventually, I'm planning to do a custom water cooling loop, which is something I've never done before, but I want to do because that sounds awesome. So eventually going to do that. So that's going to obviously have to replace the stock cooler on here, which it does look really nice. It's going to kind of suck to not have that, but at the same time, I'll have a custom water cooling loop. That easily makes up for that. And depending on if I stick with the 980 Ti or not at that point, we'll see. I'm probably still going to at that time, because I'm probably going to go for the liquid cooling loop before I ever even switch out the graphics card. Although eventually I also do want to go with an AMD graphics card Whether that ends up being Vega or whatever else they come along with at the time, we'll see. I do want to go AMD though, because as a Linux user, I'd rather use the open source drivers. Not necessarily just because, yay, free and open source and stuff, but also because that'd just be a lot easier to deal with for like kernel updates and stuff. I could pretty much run whatever like the latest kernel that I want to, whereas with dealing with NVIDIA and how the open source drivers for NVIDIA cards are basically crap, it can cause problems, especially if you're also testing out Linux distros. You like with my 980 Ti, for example, this thing does not play nicely with the open source drivers, especially I don't know if it's necessarily because I'm using the DisplayPort output, but like something stupid with this, like it's so annoying. Whereas my old Radeon Sapphire 7850 card just worked flawlessly on the open source drivers, so that was pretty great. It saved me when I had to do a reinstall of Solus. I guess I didn't really talk about that part. When I was talking about the build, I was kind of talking about after I took it off the test bench. Totally not the motherboard box, definitely a test bench. Yeah, it wasn't just sitting on my table there on a cardboard box. What are you talking about? No, it wasn't. That's not what I was doing while waiting for the case to arrive. You can't prove anything. Anyway, yeah. While I was on that, when I moved my OS drive from the old system to the new one, now that's the thing you can do with Linux. You can just swap the stuff out as you feel like it, because Linux doesn't care. It's just like, okay, oh, new hard drive or new hardware, neat, and it'll just kind of work usually. When I moved my SSD from the old system to the new Ryzen parts, when I was getting stuff set up for testing on the test bed, I had to reinstall Solus because, like, for whatever reason, it's like the boot manager that Solus uses, like the motherboard wasn't detecting it, I guess, but then reinstalling it did work. And then for some reason after that, I could still move it back to the old system, and I had to redo my benchmarks and then back to this one, and everything was just fine. So I don't know what was up with that, but yeah, that was just a little weird thing, which usually you're not gonna just straight up move your drive directly to the new thing. You're probably gonna reinstall anyway, because I don't know, fresh install. I mean, eventually I'm going to anyway once I get that NVMe SSD, just to make sure everything is all good and clean, like a clean slate, which you don't really need to do that with Linux usually, but you know, just gonna do that anyway. Might be a better idea rather than trying to copy stuff over. Anyway, future plans. So, gonna do a custom loop. Eventually, I want to do AMD graphics card, modern AMD graphics card. I'm absolutely not going back to that old 7850. That's for sure. One way or another, like if I do stick with the 980 Ti for longer than initially planned, I'm going to switch out that cooler. So, I guess initially the 980 Ti is probably going to end up part of the custom loop, which would mean if and when I switch to the AMD graphics, I would have to like redo stuff like that. But it's not, since it is my first custom loop, it's obviously not going to be like hardline tubing or anything. It's going to be the soft tubing, so it's not like I would need to do bends again or anything with that. So definitely easier to switch parts out than a hardline tubing custom water cooling loop, as cool as those do look. So yeah, that's what I got planned for the future. Like as far as SSDs go, I am also going to eventually, like this is probably gonna be the last thing I do. Well, two of the last things I do. Eventually I might do 32 gigabytes of RAM instead, so that I can all right, I didn't really go over the 4K benchmarks with Blender in this video. So I did go over it in the Kden Live versus Blender video, but to sum up, with Blender, you can't, it doesn't really use multiple threads for the video sequence editor. So like you have to do like a third-party script, and with that script, it does like basically you can have it do like one process for every thread that your CPU has. So I can do that just fine with 1080p and 1440p. If I try to do that with 4K, it uses too much RAM, and that, causes the system to lock up. So that's no good. From my calculations for how much RAM each process uses when rendering at 4K, technically I only need 24 gigabytes of RAM, but I'd like to fill all those DIMM slots because that's something I've never done before, and that would just look nice. So, yeah. So who knows when that'll happen. I'm probably not going to do it too soon because even 1440p, I mean, that's still double the pixels basically of 1080p. So that's still going to look a lot better on YouTube, especially because of bitrate. What else is I going to say? Oh, right. Also eventually coming, much like the 32 gigabytes of RAM, probably going to come before that, though, is going to be the 1 terabyte NVMe drive. Well, okay, I'm saying NVMe. I don't know if it actually is. I don't think it actually is NVMe. It's just a M.2 drive. I think it's technically still SATA, though. Which, if it was NVMe, it'd probably be a lot more expensive. Either way, 1 terabyte Western Digital Blue M.2 drive. Eventually going to have that either supplementing my current 500 gigabytes 850 Evo, or I don't know. Anyway, that's about it for this one, dudes. If you guys like this, make sure to like, consider subscribing, all that good stuff. For the future, with all the crazy crap that's been going on with YouTube, I'm not leaving YouTube. We're not going to pretend I'm leaving YouTube, but I'm going to start looking into things like vid.me. I'm going to look into that a little bit. So I expect some news in the coming weeks, like probably something like, hey, I'm on vid.me now. Check this stuff out. We'll go from there. Anyway, till next time, this has been Akzel. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you dudes in the next one.